see here on your screen is an installation view of Follow Her Lead. And there beside the Moroccan Bridal Ensemble that you see here next to the text is an introduction to the exhibit, which I'd like to read to you. The full title of the exhibition, Follow Her Lead, Womanhood in African and Diasporic Arts, is there. And I've included a proverb, an Akan proverb, which is a woman gave birth to a king. The exhibition introduction reads that this exhibition draws from the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art permanent collection to feature works created by, for, and about women from Africa and the African diaspora. It explores arts of fashion, leadership, transformation, and motherhood that inform the expression and representation of womanhood. Follow Her Lead also responds to the fact that wooden objects sculpted by men dominate the Stanley Museum's African collection. In the West, nearly all African objects first recognized as art in the early 20th century were wooden masks and figures. Not surprisingly, the history of African art exhibitions has given special treatment to wooden objects. However, the Stanley Museum collection also includes over 200 African ceramics, mostly pots, vessels, and so on, made almost entirely by women. In order to embrace the importance of women's art from Africa and the diaspora, this collection has doubled since 2015. 3 historic examples appear at the entryway to this exhibition, and you see those here on the left in the foreground of this photo. Recently acquired contemporary works include Joyce Scott's necklace Election Day, which uses fashion as a statement on the need for everyone to vote. Simone Lee's 103 Face Jug series engages innovatively with historic arts of Africa in order to explore Black female subjectivity. An elaborate construction of female identity underlies the Ait Kabash style bridal ensemble from Southeast Morocco. And you see that on display here next to the introduction in the gallery. Some of the objects in this exhibition were created by women. Some use fashion to engage womanhood as a subject, and still others use the female form to embody social and political ideals. In each example, womanhood is central as a form of agency and a central form of agency and innovative system of power. So I'd also like to draw your attention to the fact that this exhibition includes a DVD documentary film produced and directed by Professor Cynthia Becker at Boston University, who came to Iowa City in the fall of 2019, soon after the exhibition opened. And she gave a talk about her extensive research in Morocco and the context for this Moroccan bridal ensemble. So as I mentioned in the introduction, the installation is organized broadly into the themes of fashion, leadership, transformation, and motherhood. And so you see here on the far left, a group of objects that I've placed together in the context of leadership, which also includes these pots. Along the back wall, these are objects in which fashion functions as an instrument of leadership for and about women. And here on this next slide, you can see other objects that relate to the powers of transformation and motherhood. And here, front and center, you also see Simone Lee's 103 Face Jug series. So in terms of historical precedent at the Stanley Museum, this is the first time that I've combined works from the African diaspora with the African collection. And in terms of the museum's general history, that hasn't been done a whole lot of times. I think more often it was done through the work of Vicki Rovine, a previous curator at the museum. And as I mentioned, one of the main reasons that I chose this subject was basically the nature of the collection, which, as you see here, this snapshot from the Art and Life in Africa website, you're looking at examples of wooden objects from the museum's African collection. So these wooden objects created exclusively by men dominate both the collection and the exhibition history at the museum. And so I chose to focus on objects created by women, such as these, which comprise only 8% of the museum's collection. And so this has become a major focus for me as a curator in terms of acquiring objects for the museum collection to better represent women artists in Africa and the African diaspora. And so this was one of the leading factors that drove me to pursue this subject. There are some exceptions, including this exhibition that my PhD advisor, the late Christopher Roy, curated back in 1991 and 92, Women's Art in Africa, Wood-Fired Pottery from Iowa Collections. So he curated this exhibition roughly 30 years ago. And it's an exception to the predominant focus on wooden objects and in some cases textiles, which are also by a large part made by men. And so this is an exception to that, where Chris Roy looked very carefully and specifically at pots created by women. And the majority of objects in this exhibition were from private collections in Iowa rather than the museum collection. And again, an exception to that we see here on the right, this Bamana style vessel that I acquired for the museum in 2016. This vessel was featured in that exhibition in 91 and 92. I mentioned another exception, the work of Vicky Rovine, who curated several exhibitions of contemporary work by artists in the African diaspora. This American artist, in fact, Sonia Clarke, whose work responds directly to canonical works of African art, such as these hats here on the left that you see that bear a striking resemblance to these two hats in the museum's collection from Central Africa. So I bring these up as historical precedents that focus on the work of women in Africa and the diaspora. Beyond this, my own research in African art history includes recognition of work by other scholars like Barbara Thompson, who curated Black womanhood, images, icons, and ideologies of the African body at the Hood Museum, Dartmouth College in 2008. So it's been a while since that exhibition took place, but I bring it to your attention as one of the things I'm responding to with this exhibition. And then also a program that I attended last March at the Iowa City Public Library titled Black Women Are the Future, led by the Center for Afrofuturist Studies, artist in residence, Celia Peters, who hosted this event with Sherry Renee Thomas and Ingrid LaFleur. So in that conversation, the focus was Black women working in science fiction and media that identify with Afrofuturism. And in my conversations after the event with Celia Peters, I recognized the importance of engaging the African collection, not only with artists working in the diaspora, but contemporary artists as well, because the fact is the majority of the African collection at the Stanley Museum is historical. So I'll begin my look at this exhibition with a focus on arts of leadership and follow her lead. And so what you see here are a group of objects that includes two prints by Elizabeth Catlett. So the original installation of this exhibition included this work on the far right, which is Catlett's Malcolm X Speaks for Us from 1969. And because of its light sensitivity, we need to rotate prints. And so since then, we've brought in a second generation by Elizabeth Catlett as well. So I begin with Elizabeth Catlett for one main reason, the fact that she was the first person in America to get an MFA in studio art in 1940. And she earned that MFA on the campus here at the University of Iowa when the campus was still segregated until 1946. So an extraordinary accomplishment in terms of her academic credentials and getting that first MFA in studio art here at the University of Iowa. And I'll take the same opportunity to mention the fact, which I've said many times before, Roy Sieber was the first person in the country to get a PhD in African art history in 1957. So 17 years later, then Catlett earned her degree here at Iowa. So these are images that have to do with both political and spiritual power and leadership, and specifically with Malcolm X Speaks for Us. I think this particular print demonstrates Catlett's role as a powerful leader in the Black arts movement, where we see faces of 15 Black women facing Malcolm X, emphasizing the importance of women in the Black community for which he speaks. And so within that print here at the top, we see Catlett's sampling of her own work that she produced while living in Mexico previously, prior to this work of 1969. And so I think it's a good example of the way in which she's introducing gender dynamics into the discussion about racial justice and the civil rights movements in the mid-20th century in America. Her work, A Second Generation, it belongs to a portfolio based on the 1937 poem, For My People, by Margaret Walker, who also earned her MFA here at the University of Iowa in creative writing in 1940, along with Catlett the same year. So this print corresponds to a stanza in Walker's poem that reads, "Let a new earth rise, let another world be born, let a bloody peace be written in the sky. Let a second generation full of courage issue forth. Let a people loving freedom come to growth. Let a beauty full of healing and the strength of final clenching be the pulsing in our spirit and our blood. Let the martial songs be written. Let the dirges disappear. Let a race of men now rise and take control." So a very powerful poem for a very powerful print created by Catlett in 1992. And so I bring these images in as an introduction to this group of objects about leadership and womanhood in arts of Africa and the diaspora. And so as you see in this image, these objects next to them are from the Stanley collection, objects created by men that represent women. But before I dive into those more carefully, I'd like to bring your attention to the fact that I'm showing Catlett's work next to an Igbo style mask. And so what I can't share with you as easily in this Zoom meeting is the way that these objects interact with each other in space, so that the perspective you get on one object reveals something significant that you can only see in actual space versus a Zoom meeting. But I bring this photograph to your attention so that you can see the proximity of Catlett's print beside this Igbo style mask. And I do that because the fact is, Catlett was looking very closely at African art for her work. And so you see here the angular treatment of transitions among the facial planes above the jawline in Catlett's work here, demonstrates how she samples the stylistic features in canonical works of African art like this Igbo mask, which lends historical depth to her visionary depiction of future generations in A Second Generation. So you see here in Catlett's work this raised ridge that extends from the temple to the corners of the mouth. And that's a very, very characteristic feature of sculpted masks and figures throughout sub-Saharan Africa. Particularly in West and Central Africa, you see this heart-shaped form, this planar element of this Igbo-style mask. So these are the kinds of things that Catlett was looking at, among other things, in order to convey that depth of historical, cultural heritage in her vision of future generations within this struggle for liberation during the civil rights movement. Beside Catlett's prints, we have these fantastic examples of historic works from the Stanley Collection of African Art. So here, I'd like to remind you again that many wooden objects created by men in the Stanley collection depict the female figure in leadership roles. In these three examples, images of womanhood are central to conveying gendered notions of political power and the performative arts of healing. So on the far right here, we have a Yoruba style elephone masquerade headdress. So masks like this represent various forms of social and cultural achievement and the political power of rulers. They appear in annual festivals called Odun Epa, which honors the ancestors. And in the upper portion of this mask, we see a crowned female figure with a coral beaded necklace. You can see wearing around her neck, and a fly whisk in the right hand. You see this here. So these are emblems of chieftaincy that belong to the Ilayode, the highest ranking female chief in Yoruba society who represents the collective interests of women before the Yoruba king. So I think in this way, it forms a striking complement to the dynamics of gender and power that we see in Catlett's representation of women surrounding Malcolm X. Here, the image of a singular woman confronting that male power in the form of a king, whereas you see multiple women confronting Malcolm X in Catlett's Malcolm X Speaks for Us. Beside this Epa mask, we see a Luba-style throne, again depicting a woman in a leadership role. So a Luba-style stool like this would have belonged to a high-ranking chief in the Luba Kingdom of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and it served as the most important emblem of kingship. Most of the royal insignia from the Luba Kingdom created during the 19th century represent women directly, as is the case here, or indirectly through scarification patterns that belong to women. The expert art historian of Luba arts, Mary Nutter Roberts, has noted that it was important to the insignia of a male ruler to evoke the feminine, because power was considered to be gendered as both male and female. So the woman represented in this stool also needed to reflect aesthetic criteria upheld by women in real life, with the elegant hairstyling that you see here cascading behind the head, elaborate scarification patterns that you see throughout the abdomen and above the pelvic region, and also the composed demeanor, which you see here, a kneeling woman literally holding up this seat of power. It's also important to recognize that after a king's death, his spirit was incarnated by a titled woman called Mwari, which was common at least up until the early 70s. And this woman temporarily inherited the king's residence and some of his royal insignia. So both this Luba-style stool or throne and this Yoruba-style masquerade headdress represent depictions of political power, whereas on the far left here, this Idoma-style shrine figure belongs more specifically to the spiritual domain of a shrine context. And so throughout the canonical arts of sub-Saharan Africa, stools and seated figures signify a privileged and elevated status. And so in this image, you see this seated female figure, which belongs to the most widespread form of figure sculpture among Idoma peoples in Nigeria. And it's also the most common Idoma-style object in museum collections. They've never been documented on a shrine, and scholars commonly refer to them as representations of Anjenu, which is a water spirit called upon by women suffering from infertility or other birth-related complications. They're not actually required to, the shrines for Anjenu are not actually required to include an object such as this to be effective. So I think that we can view the high artistic quality of this example in relation to the elevated status of a woman that might be able to afford to commission an artist to create an object like this. So in any case, these three objects, these canonical works of African art from the Stanley collection, represent the ways in which the female figure, carved in wood by men, represents images of power in both secular and spiritual domains. Within the broader installation of Follow Her Lead, I've also included works by contemporary artist Toyin Oji Odutola, and this is her work on the left, Birmingham from 2014. And of course, because it's a work on paper, it was rotated out after the first round of installations and replaced by this incredible mask by Lansana Ngumoy. The dates are less clear for that, although we know it's from the early 20th century. So Toyin Oji Odutola, born at Ile-Ife in 1985, now works and lives in New York City. So I bring her into the section on arts of leadership in this exhibition because she is in fact a leading contemporary artist that, like Catlett, uses stylistic features that you see in canonical works of African art in order to create contemporary portraits. So Catlett looked to masks from West and Central Africa, and Odutola mentions historical textiles from the continent as a source of inspiration for her particular technique. So the woven pattern of skin that you see in Odutola's work is also similar to the appearance of braided hair, which is one of the most consistent and important symbols of rank and status in canonical works of African figure sculpture as well. Describing her work from this period around 2014, Odutola has remarked that she was confronting this notion, quote, this notion we have in America, that Black bodies could only occupy a few specific locations and frames in order to feel authentic, that the Black image is only profitable in certain spaces within the realm of entertainment or sports, for instance, was off-putting, to say the least, end quote. So in order to highlight the subjective identity of her models, which is her brother in this case, she uses a layering technique with a ballpoint pen to produce a richly textured surface topography that is unique to each individual. So after the first installation, as I mentioned, to Follow Her Lead, we brought in this gorgeous Sande mask, Sande Society mask by Lansana Ngumoy. And this mask attests to leadership roles among the elder women in Sande societies in Sierra Leone who own and perform these masks during initiation and education of young women into adulthood. So historically, Sande masks serve the only known instance in which women impersonate spirits with a full body mask. Each of these masks has its own name, and Mende speakers in Sierra Leone use the generic term Ndoli July, which means the Sande leader or the expert leader who dances. In this particular example, features in the mask represent women's ideals, such as the physical beauty of scarification patterns that you can see just below the eyes and on the cheeks, and the dark, smooth, and glossy skin, cultivated as ideals of physical beauty. The large forehead emphasizes the importance of intellectual power and strength, while the small mouth refers to the importance of maintaining secrets within the Sande society. So an extraordinary example of historical work of African art in the Stanley Museum collection. This was acquired by purchase in 2006, and it's exceptional not only because of its aesthetic quality, but also because the fact that we know who made it, Lansana Ngumoy. And so that's rather exceptional for work within this genre. So here within this group of objects that support the theme of leadership, I've given prominence to the placement of ceramics, which is meant to highlight the importance of this particular art form for women working in Africa and the diaspora. So I bring in these three works on the left that are in the Makonde, Zulu, and Gaanda style, which are positioned near a work by the contemporary artist Simone Lee, whose work there on the far left, 103 Face Jig series, created in 2018. I'd like to mention again that throughout sub-Saharan Africa, women create and use pottery in domestic settings to demonstrate well-being and prosperity, and many women profit directly from the pottery trade as an important means of financial income. So as I mentioned here, the examples here on the upper left, this is a Makonde style pot, a Zulu style pot, and a Gaanda style pot. And each of these three examples features geometric patterns inscribed or inscribed here or added onto the surface in these two examples, the Zulu and Gaanda style pots, that evoke the history of similar scarification designs worn by women during the colonial era in these cases, West, East, and South Africa. So this Makonde style pot, I can say that among Makonde women during the colonial era, Makonde women underwent the slow and painful process of scarification in order to prepare for the physical pains of labor and childbirth. And they also rubbed kale and clay onto the face as a sign of beauty. And you see both of those aesthetic practices within pots that evoke those scarification patterns and the rubbing in of kale and clay within those inscribed forms on the surface of those pots. And this is a water vessel. Beneath it, the Zulu style pot decorated with nodules around the mouth of the pot called amasumfa. So these raised nodules, again, evoke scarification patterns among Zulu women, but more importantly, it also is a broader reference to the importance of womanhood, which is evoked by the smooth, glossy, dark surface and the round symmetry of the vessel itself. In terms of Zulu mythology, the female gender of the earth is a direct analogy to the fact that this object is made from the earth and refers to that female principle of the earth through its glossy, darkened surface, like the skin of a woman, and the round form. Beside it, this Gaanda style pot, you see here this anthropomorphized or human-like features of this pot includes a navel here at the central base of the form, is surrounded by these geometric patterns. Again, in this context, among Gaanda peoples in Nigeria, these geometric patterns are identical to scarification patterns called hlita, which young women acquired over a series of 6 stages prior to getting married. And so that same process of socialization and evolution and transformation among women is apparent within these additional geometric patterns that you see in this pot. So my placement of these 3 examples near Simone Lee's work is meant to draw attention to their stylistic relationships, including the way that potters anthropomorphize these forms, whether it's a representation of the abdomen or the face. Ceramics remain a focus for leading contemporary female artists in the diaspora. The fact is that Simone Lee's work also belongs to a history of face jugs created by enslaved people living at Edgefield, South Carolina in the early 1860s, soon after captives from the Lower Congo region arrived to work in pottery yards in America. So in Simone Lee's work, she's basically drawing from the global African heritage on the continent proper and within America to create this striking work of art created in 2018. The previous installation of Lee's work here you see in the foreground. You can see it before other works by Catlett in the back left region here, Catlett's Which Way from 1973, and also Catlett's Maternity from 1959. Motherhood was a dominant theme throughout Catlett's career, and so I bring that into this installation with other objects that relate to motherhood. But I want to draw your attention particularly to Catlett's work in relation to this object in the background, which I brought to the foreground here. And this is a Makonde style Chitengamatu mask for women's initiation. And I bring this comparison in because of the importance of audience for these two objects. So you see here both of these objects, and so it reveals the work, Lee's work in proximity to this initiation mask, also created from clay by a female Makonde artist. So Makonde women create and perform these masks for an exclusive audience of Makonde girls undergoing initiation into adulthood. In this way, I think it's a striking complement to Lee's work, whose primary audience, according to the artist herself, is for Black women. And so in both 103 Face Jug series and this Makonde style initiation mask created by women for Black women in particular, the importance of audience is central. I'd like to near the end of my discussion of this exhibit with recognition of the Moroccan Bridal Ensemble that you see here beside the written introduction to the exhibition. So through my consultation with Professor Cynthia Becker at Boston University, I purchased various elements of this ensemble between 2016 and 2019. And as I may have mentioned before, this is the only complete Ait Kabash style bridal ensemble in an American Art Museum collection. And I acquired it because North Africa is so underrepresented in the museum collection. By and large, it consists almost entirely works from West and Central Africa, more recently with acquisitions from South Africa, and of course, some other things from East Africa as well, but very little from North Africa. And so just in terms of representation, I chose that as a focal point for the African collection. Here you can see more clearly the various elements that make up this Ait Kabash style bridal ensemble, including this headdress and silver jewelry, which historically was created by Jewish silversmiths. And the ensemble also includes factory-produced cloth purchased at the market, perhaps imported from Asia, and also an amber necklace and a wool belt that you're not able to view here, a wool headband. In terms of symbolic significance, wool in an Ait Kabash style wedding ensemble is very closely tied to the importance of fertility for the bride and her role as a mother after she becomes married. And here, next to the installation view of this ensemble, you can see a woman wearing this garment with the headdress, which in fact, as you can see, covers her face during a period of the 3-day ceremony during the wedding. Here you see on the left, women that are basically the fashion designers, the women that choose how to arrange the various elements of this bridal ensemble for the bride during the wedding. A very important role because of their knowledge of the historical ways to arrange these garments and forms of jewelry on the bride. And beside that, these are photographs from Cynthia Becker, by the way, from 1997. I also want to draw your attention to these fantastic silver bracelets worn by the bride as well. And I have recently acquired those for the museum as well. The spiked bracelets at the top are translated from Amazigh language. They're called bracelets of animal horns, historically used as a form of protection. And beneath them, these flat form bracelets. So altogether, these elements make up the only complete Ait Kabosh style wedding ensemble in an art museum collection. And I'd like to end particularly with this comparison of this bridal ensemble in relation to Simone Lee's work, 103 Face Jug series. So these are the most recent acquisitions that are included in this exhibition. In her book on the Amazigh arts of Morocco, Becker shares the fact that the headdress covering within this bridal ensemble allows the bride to distance herself psychologically from the scrutiny and sometimes hurtful critiques of other women attending the wedding. So in spite of the fact that weddings are perhaps not as relevant to the context of Lee's face jug, if at all, I think it's important to recognize the politics of fashion within Ait Kabosh weddings as a context in which the community strives to preserve the bride's role as an authentic producer and representative of Amazigh identity. And they do this through the particular arrangement of the forms of jewelry and garments that are considered to be authentic and essential to what Becker sees as an authentic form of Amazigh ethnic identity. So in the eyeless face in Lee's work, the eyeless face in Lee's work belongs to what she describes, the artist herself, as an autoethnographic approach to art, where she combines self-narrative with anthropological research. Without eyes, the psychological distance in this work also results from what the writer Sharifa Rhodes Pitts calls Lee's ability to succinctly demolish the category of identity as it has appeared in contemporary art during the last 30-odd years. So it's in this context of a reconciling with identity, whether it's demolishing it or authenticating it, that these two objects, I think, correspond in a very fascinating way. So as a result of this demolishing this category of identity in contemporary art, Sharifa Rhodes Pitts suggests that Lee's work creates a new space in which we will also be able to gaze inwardly. And so you see this eyeless countenance in Lee's work that has to do with this reckoning with identity that ties it to the identity that's authenticated through performance within Ait Kabosh weddings. So perhaps an unexpected comparison, but one that deals with aspects of identity nonetheless, and in that context can be viewed as, I think, an interesting comparison. So with that, I'd like to end my talk and thank you very much for your time.